Do you think the solution would be, even if logistically difficult, to have everyone take the practical at the same time?
I'm not sure if it could be done that way.
Yes,
and
I
I know
suppose
it's
that's right.
relatively common across disciplines at university as well. I know at law school this kind of thing was not entirely uncommon. When someone had their exam scheduled for, say, Thursday, and their mate had their exam scheduled, the same exam, for Friday, that, you know, often they talk to each other. And I'm not sure there's a way to stop that. Most people are ethical about it, and they don't say anything and they don't ask. But I know that there were some instances where, you know, the talking did happen, and I think it's probably more common in these really high pressure disciplines like medicine or law for this kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, look, I agree. I do wonder how much of an issue it actually is. I mean, I personally wouldn't be telling people what was in the exam. I think it should be a level playing field. But the thing I found most offensive about this issue was that student that was talking to Critic, who was kind of justifying it and saying the people that were telling the other people what was happening are the most dedicated of the students. And it's like, well, give me a break.
I'm kind of terrified too by the idea of a doctor who passed an exam only because his mates told him the content of it. You wouldn't want that doctor in the surgery room.
No.
He can always keep phoning his mates. But you still have to be able to perform in the practical. You know, it's not, as someone said, it's not like knowing all the answers, getting a multi-choice sheet with all the answers on it. You still actually have to be able to do it in front of the examiners, put your hands in the right place and follow the right procedures and so on.
Yeah, look, I agree, and that's why I suspect it's not as big an issue as it's being made out to be. I don't know why, if you're in the first group, you'd give everyone else a bit of a heads up, because even if they talk about marking the first group more easily, it just doesn't make sense to me that you would give the benefit to other people so they might get a better grade. But maybe I'm a bit selfish.
Another aspect of asking people for money, as we were talking about in Te Puke with the proposed new post office and visitor centre, there's also a call to donate to the Go bus drivers who were locked out in Waikato. Do you think, both of you, that Ngāi Tahu and Tainui need to get involved here? They own Go bus, and of course there's also the aspect of local authorities who give their own staff a living wage, and whether they should be helping bus drivers earn a living wage too. Do you have an opinion here?
Well, I don't know much about Go Bus's ownership, but the treatment of bus drivers has been in the news a huge amount this year, and I think it's a bloody hard job. I think it's long hours, and I think bus drivers deserve, as a minimum, a living wage, and I think it's disgraceful that they don't get it. And I also think it's disgraceful that local authorities are hypocrites by choosing these low price contracts which ensure the drivers get poor wages when they sort of, they go around parading that they pay a living wage. It's just hypocrisy at its worst.
Yeah, the thing that really gets me, and I'm a former First Union official, and First Union represents these bus drivers, so obviously I'm biased, but the thing that gets me is that Ngāi Tahu and Waikato Tainui Group Holdings, they're the two holding companies for the two big iwi, that they have not stepped in here to say that this is not consistent with our Māori values. This isn't consistent with tikanga values. So, I am kind of wondering, at what point do they step in and start, living up to their values?
It is an interesting stoush and interesting points you make. Thank you, Morgan. Morgan Godfrey's been on the panel. Victoria Stewart as well. Thank you both. Please come back.
We would love to. Thanks,
not that that's in doubt. And thanks for your company, everybody. Checkpoint on the way.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, police say they'll train for the Pike River re-entry but still have not decided if they will go underground. They're waiting on an independent safety review but haven't even chosen the experts to do the work, let alone started the review yet. The timetable to break the seal on the mine is February next year. In Dunedin, the call's out for sandbaggers as the city is hammered with rainfall that's double what's considered a heavy drenching. We'll talk to the Met Service. And is a car park a road? Do you need to belt up or just simply pay up if you aren't wearing your seatbelt in a car park? And the stomach churning lift drop, 80 floor free fall.
RNZ News at 5. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. Dozens of people have been told to leave their homes, and the Dunedin City Council has activated its Emergency Operations Centre as rain causes flooding across the region. The small rural settlement of Henley near Dunedin is likely to flood, endangering houses, though the Otago Regional Council is preparing to open a slipway on the Pike River if need be. The City Council is calling for volunteers to help fill sandbags in South Dunedin. It says people should stay off the roads to prevent washing floodwaters into properties. A council spokesperson, Sandy Graham, says the rain has affected much of the city.
We've got some issues in Middlemarch. There are obviously some pressures on the Taieri, with the Pike River starting to see a little bit of surface flooding through South Dunedin and a little bit on West Harbour. So it's quite widespread, but we've managed as well as can be expected for the rain we've had.
Sandy Graham says the slips are also a problem, with one hitting State Highway 88 between Dunedin and Port Chalmers. The rain has now eased, although almost 50 millimetres fell in the city today, and river levels remain high across Otago. 3 Melbourne men have been charged with preparing for or planning terrorist acts. The men, aged between 21 and 30, were arrested in counter-terrorism raids in the city's north this morning. The police national manager of counter-terrorism, Ian McCartney, says they were preparing to carry out an Islamic State-styled attack aimed at killing as many people as possible.
If we had not acted early in preventing this attack, we'll allege the consequences would have been chilling, with a potential significant loss of human life.
Ian McCartney says the trio had been under surveillance since March, but had recently stepped up their plans. Earlier this month, 3 men were found guilty of plotting to carry out a terror attack in Melbourne CBD during the 2016 Christmas period. Pike River families are hoping to turn over a new leaf with the police following a meeting with them in Greymouth today. Their spokesperson Bernie Monk has talked about the mistrust between them and the police, believing they had not been open with them about their investigation in the past. Today, the police met with them to explain how they would collect forensic evidence and why they needed to do their own risk assessment before deciding whether to enter the mine. Mr Monk says the officers they met today are all fresh to the case, which will help build trust with the families.
It was like starting a whole new page of where we were going to head, and I felt very comfortable that the families will be able to work with the team they've got on board.
Bernie Monk says he would prefer it if the police entered the mine to ensure evidence was gathered in the proper way. Some future doctors are cheating in their exams. The University of Otago says some third-year medical students have told others yet to take their exams of some of the content. The acting dean, Barry Taylor, says students are forbidden to talk to others about exams. However, he says the nature of exams means students can't quickly learn the content required to pass. The medical school says the students involved are going to be interviewed, and what could happen to them is still being determined. The Minister for Housing and Urban Development, Phil Twyford, admits the 68 Kiwi-built homes planned for a new Plymouth suburb will be out of the reach of many local residents. Mr Twyford says the 3- and 4-bedroom homes in Marfell will cost a maximum of $450,000 and are targeted at people who can service a mortgage.
People who have a household income of, let's say, 70,000, 70, 80, 90,000 would be able to take on the kind of mortgage that we're talking about for these homes here.
Phil Twyford says people who could not afford a mortgage are being catered for. He says 9 Housing New Zealand homes have been built in New Plymouth recently, and another 20 are planned over the next few years. About 1,400 people in New Plymouth are currently in the ballot for a Kiwi-built home. The government is injecting an extra $13.75 million over 3 years for research to combat the spread of kauri dieback and myrtle rust. The Research, Science and Innovation Minister Megan Woods says it's important that work gets underway as soon as possible to protect native trees.
This investment will mean that critically important research programs that address kauri dieback and myrtle rust can begin straight away.
Megan Woods says the funding announced today comes on top of $15 million that's been committed previously. A Tauranga City councillor is promising to resign if a ban on begging doesn't make the city safer. The bylaw banning beggars and rough sleepers from within 5 metres of shops in the central business districts of Tauranga, Mount Maunganui and Greerton passed narrowly this afternoon. Some councillors say it's a waste of money and is like putting a band-aid over the problem. City Councillor Terry Malloy, who proposed the ban, says beggars and rough sleepers have affected businesses and caused problems for the community. Mr Malloy says if the ban doesn't improve the situation, he'll resign.
I feel strongly about how it's affecting our wider community, and I feel very strongly about how it's affecting those that are less fortunate. And I have been working at both ends of this problem.
City Councillor Terry Malloy. The bylaw will be enforced from April next year. It's 5:05. To sport, the celebrations won't go on too long following the Black Caps' dramatic 4-run win over Pakistan, says skipper Kane Williamson. Debutant spinner Azaz Patel was the star on the fourth day, taking 5 wickets to help the Black Caps to their narrowest test win. Set 176 for victory in the UAE, the hosts were dismissed for 171. It was the Black Caps' first test in almost 8 months, but Williamson isn't prepared to settle for a one-off win.
It's important we look now to Dubai as a team, and we will be faced with some slightly different conditions again there, so we will need to put our heads down and adapt and be a little bit better from this game as well.
The second test starts on Saturday. Meanwhile, the disgraced Australian cricketers Steve Smith, David Warner and Cameron Bancroft will serve out their suspensions. Cricket Australia has reviewed the bans after the trio were suspended following the ball tampering scandal in South Africa and deemed the punishments appropriate. The National Rugby League Chief Executive Todd Greenberg is refusing to speculate on Jared Hayne's playing future after the former Parramatta star was charged with sexual assault. The 30-year-old is accused of sexually assaulting a woman in Hunter Valley on the night of the NRL Grand Final in September. And the Olympic gold medalist Ryan Fry and his Canadian teammates have been kicked out of a World Curling event in Alberta for being drunk. Fry and his team were expelled following complaints they were breaking brooms and swearing. That's the news.
Drama for Auckland's Pride Parade.
I see this kind of decision by the Auckland Pride Board as being quite retrograde, disappointing, destructive.
A dramatic win for the Black Caps.
And what a victory for the New Zealanders. They deserve it.
And trade tensions at APEC.
We are already in a Cold War. That's why canny, smaller nations must act cleverly in their own interest.
News in your interest. Weekdays on Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson.
Then on 9 to noon, the latest on homegrown efforts on soft plastic recycling. But is the packaging industry genuinely looking for green alternatives? And after 10, bringing new blood to the vampire genre with Bram Stoker's great-grandnephew, Dacre Stoker. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast now from Met Service through to midnight tomorrow Wednesday, Northland to Manawatu. That includes Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Showers heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms, clearing for a time in the morning tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine apart from a few showers in the afternoons and evenings, possible thunderstorms inland. Horowhenua to Wellington, Waited Upper, a few showers, some heavy with possible hail and thunder, chiefly about the ranges in the afternoons and evenings. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and northern Westland, fine spells, isolated showers. Showers becoming scattered and heavier inland in the afternoons and evenings, possible thunderstorms and hail. For the rest of Westland, also Fiordland, occasional rain today, mainly fine tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, periods of rain. Some heavy falls. Snow to about 600 metres today. Rain easing in Canterbury tonight and gales southeasterlies about the coast easing tonight. At the Chathams, periods of rain clearing tomorrow. 8.5 minutes past 5.
You're listening to Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Later in the program we'll update you on Dunedin's weather woes, but first, the police will train to go into the Pike River mine drift for the planned re-entry next year, but they may still decide not to go underground. Officials from the Pike River Recovery Agency, police and the Chief Coroner met with families of Pike River victims in Greymouth today to update them on the re-entry plans. The minister responsible for Pike River announced last week that work to break the 30-metre seal in the mine, where 29 men died, is expected to start in February. The police are carrying out their own risk assessment of the plan and are yet to decide if any of their staff will enter the drift. I asked Police Assistant Commissioner Response and Operations, Tasha Penny, what concerns she has.
Lisa, under the health and safety legislation, and just as an employer, we just want to make sure that we do our own sort of independent risk assessment to make sure that when the police executives make the decision whether or not to send our staff under, that we're from a really robust position.
So who's doing that?
So at the moment we're actually scouting out for a few international experts, one who can look at the overall plan and then someone else to have a look at the ventilation plan for us. So we're hoping that can be done as quickly as possible.
So it hasn't even started yet. You're still seeking the experts to carry it out for you.
So just today we've had another discussion with the Recovery Agency and other people, just making sure that the people we have already identified are actually the people that we need to engage with. We have had conversations already, but I just want to make the point that it won't affect any of the training that's already been booked in. So we have got staff, up to 20 staff, who are going to do some familiarisation training. So that's going down to actually a mine to go underground just to see how everyone feels, because unless you've been underground, you probably don't know whether it's something for you. And then second phase will be actually undergoing some climatisation and induction training around mine protocol and safety techniques and everything else. So that training we've booked in and is still going ahead.
Okay, two things there. When do you expect to make a decision by?
So look, we've got no time frame set in, but what we are doing is we are trying to get the decision or the information we need as soon as possible so that we can make a recommendation up to the police executive, because we do know that there are time frames in place. So we just feel it's really important, though, to have this secondary check around the risk assessment for us to ensure that when our police staff go down there, everything that we have done to be a good employer has been done.
Last week, with regards to the training, last week in a written response, the police told us that they weren't participating in the Otago mine training, which was due to start later this month. So have you changed your minds on that?
No, so I don't know about that media release, Lisa, but what I can say is we are going to do some joint training in December. And look, we're very much, we are not mine experts, so we need to make that point. So, just today I've spent a lot of time with the Chief Operating Officer from the Recovery Agency, Dingy Pattinson, who is an expert in all things mines, and talked about what sort of training we need. So whatever training we need to make sure that our people can do to make them safe if they go into the re-entry, we will absolutely sign up to do.
Okay, so you're doing all the training, but that's not a commitment to go underground, is it? You could still say no.
No, but it is a commitment to be prepared so that if we do go under, that our staff are well trained, both in the familiarisation, so have that opportunity to know, because it may sound okay, but you go underground in a mine and you might have a reaction you didn't know. So really important that we do familiarisation, and then secondly, like I said, that we do as detailed or intensive training as the mine experts tell us would be required of police staff to actually go under in those circumstances.
But to be clear, just so people are not misled or confused, just because you're doing the training does not mean you will go down into the drift.
No, that's correct.
Okay.
We're doing the training to be prepared, but we will await the secondary risk assessments that we're doing, and then we will then put that information to the police executive, who ultimately will make the decision whether or not police re-enter the mine.
What reassurances were you able to give the Pike River families today that if you don't go into the drift, the integrity of this operation will be preserved, because it is primarily about gathering evidence and information to look for the cause and also potentially to bring human remains out?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a very comprehensive and good conversation today with the family and their representatives, including really experienced legal brains. So, of course, the integrity of the investigation is at the forefront of our mind. In fact, it's the key point of us being there, and to carry out any procedures on behalf of the Chief Coroner, who is also present. So, we talked about things like what processes we'd follow, and talked about Plan A and Plan B, whether we were to go down and actually do the initial work ourselves, or whether our police staff would actually be standing outside still making sure that everything was done with integrity. As we've told them, it's the first of many conversations that we'll have, and we're committed to step them through exactly the process so everyone feels very comfortable and everyone's
So who is Plan
open.
B? So who is Plan B? If you don't go down, who collects the material? Who does that?
So, as we said, it's a little bit like any crime scene, actually, Lisa, that we have throughout the country. Sometimes you get crimes that occur and you'll have people pick up various exhibits, whether they know that or not. So let's say we have, a serious assault. Someone could actually end up picking up a hammer walk 2 kilometres or go to the police station and give it to you. That integrity of the exhibit can still be maintained. So, look, every single process will be well thought of.
That's the exception. I understand that example, but that's the exception to the rule. As a general basis, you would collect, or ESR would collect evidence for a court case or from a crime scene. That is your first priority. That's the way you would like it to be. So if it's not going to be you and it's not going to be ESR because they have ruled themselves out here, who's plan B? Will the police train minors to do this job?
Yeah, well, potentially that is an option, that we have to sit down, like the miners would train us in relation to safety, in relation to the initial preliminary pick-up of any exhibits that were located there, and hand immediately to police or ESR staff as soon as it comes out. And as we talk through, again, with some pretty senior legal minds around that table too, the integrity of these exhibits will be maintained whether we're there or not. And we're working really hard to have a finite decision as soon as we can in relation to police re-entering.
Are you absolutely sure that those exhibits will stand up in court? Because police have made mistakes around Pike River before. Are you sure?
So look, what we're looking forward to, we're looking from today to the future, and the commitment we have absolutely given not only those families but New Zealand is that we will ensure that the integrity of the investigation and completion of the crime scene investigation is paramount, and it will be done to the highest standard. No matter whether we're there actually in the mine or not, that will happen.
Do the families trust you? Because Bernie Monk has said that the ideal situation would be if no police were involved that had previously been involved in Pike River before. They would like a totally fresh batch of police officers to deal with this. Are you going to agree to that?
So what I can look, trust is a really big word. I met with the family today, for many of them for the very first time that I'd met with them, and police have given the families a commitment. I personally gave them a commitment today about the way we will communicate, about how we'll be transparent with all our processes, and so I suppose can they trust us? Of course they can. We're looking to the future, but that's a question for the families.
Will that be a fresh batch of police who are dealing with the Pike River operation re-entry?
What we're having is we'll make sure that we've got the right skilled police. So, look, to be honest, it will be a mixture of people who have got some knowledge of it. There are new staff being brought in all the time. I myself have only been involved with Pike River for the last week. So what we can assure people is we will have the right police officers at the right level with the right experience, and we have one purpose, and that is to support the recovery agency and to make sure that the investigation we do will be absolutely to the highest standard that possible.
And that is Tasha Penny there. She's the Police Assistant Commissioner who is involved in Pike River, the re-entry program, saying that the police will train, but they haven't decided yet whether they will go in. The Medical Council says it's horrified that a New Zealand-trained woman fraudulently posed as a psychiatrist in England for 22 years. Zolia Alemi lied to the General Medical Council when she applied for work in 1995, saying that she had a medical degree from the University of Auckland. As concerns mount for the many patients she treated, health authorities here are giving assurances that strict systems are in place when foreign doctors apply for work. Alex Perrottet reports.
If you search for Zolia Alemi on the General Medical Council register, her entry no longer exists. In its place is a statement from Chief Executive Charlie Massey confessing to an inadequate testing system and a vow to undertake an urgent investigation. Last month, Zolia Alemi was jailed for 5 years for fraud. She redrafted the will of an elderly patient in an attempt to inherit her $2.4 million estate. But since then, a UK journalist's simple inquiries of the University of Auckland have revealed she never had a medical degree. As chief reporter of the Cumberland News, Phil Coleman explained to 9 to Noon, all it took was a few phone calls.
One of the most astonishing parts of this whole story for me is the simplicity of finding out that she was a complete fraud. She had a career built on a massive lie. It took 3 simple phone calls to New Zealand, 1 to the University of Auckland and 2 more phone calls to the Medical Council of New Zealand. And those 3 calls were enough to confirm that this lady's medical qualification was completely fake.
The University of Auckland confirmed it awarded Zolia Alemi a Bachelor of Human Biology in 1992. The university says she began a medical degree but did not continue, and there's no record of any communication with the General Medical Council to verify her qualifications. Andrew Connolly is the chair of the Medical Council of New Zealand and says he's concerned that someone could so easily defraud the UK system.
Oh, just horrified. I think this is a failure of a process somewhere in the GMC system. I'm very, very surprised that someone slipped through the GMC net by presumably what must be a fairly sophisticated fraud.
He says her psychiatric patients will need a serious follow-up.
Yeah, I think it obviously opens a lot of questions about the care and treatment and ongoing care and treatment and review that some of her patients may need. And the consequences could be, life-threatening.
The Director of Registration from the UK's General Medical Council, Una Lane, has apologised for the inadequate checks back in the 1990s, and they are setting up a patients' helpline. She says she's notified police, and the council is now checking the qualifications of 3,000 foreign doctors.
We have no reason to believe that these individuals are anything other than honest doctors doing a good job and providing high quality care in the NHS to their patients. However, given the issues that we've had with this case, we think it's really important that we now check the qualifications and the credentials of all of these individuals so that we can have confidence.
So how did Alemi do it? Una Lane says she exploited special arrangements for foreign doctors entering the UK from Commonwealth countries such as New Zealand.
Meaning that they weren't required to sit the two-part test of medical knowledge and skills that were required by all other doctors coming here from overseas. That route to registration that was abolished in 2003 and so no longer exists.
Andrew Connolly says New Zealand has strict measures in place to ensure the same cannot happen here. He says an independent organisation based in the USA verifies qualifications and documents for every foreign doctor applying to work in New Zealand. But he's aware that not all countries have similar regimes in place. It's not clear whether or not Alemi will return to New Zealand once she has served her 5-year jail sentence. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
Let's head south now, which is apparently where the weather is going to. Civil Defence is urging Dunedin residents to stay off the roads after torrential rain caused widespread flooding and slips around the city this afternoon. A heavy rain warning is in place for the next few hours, and residents are being urged to conserve water to ease pressure on the wastewater system. A call for volunteers to bring their shovels and fill sandbags in South Dunedin was made by Civil Defence late this afternoon, and surface flooding at Dunedin Airport forced at least one Air New Zealand flight to abort its landing and to fly to Christchurch. A short time ago, I asked Met Service meteorologist Lisa Murray what was in store for the rest of the country and when Dunedin residents could expect a reprieve.
Well, Dunedin have had quite a lot of rainfall, particularly in the last few hours. To give you an idea, when we start getting about 6 millimetres of rain in an hour, we call it heavy rain. And there are parts of Dunedin that have seen 12.5 millimetres or 11 millimetres in an hour. So quite substantial rainfall going on, and for probably the last 3 or 4 hours. So the accumulations there are starting to certainly rise.
So almost twice what you would consider to be heavy rain. How long are you expecting it to last? Do you know yet?
Well, the heaviest falls seem to have gone through now. Now, it's not to say that the rain is going to stop. So although the heaviest falls have gone through, it will keep ticking over, and we are expecting more rainfall there. Unfortunately, we've had reports that the rivers have been rising quite rapidly in those heavy downpours, which is very typical of that. And there is some concerns down there as well about river flooding.
So what is causing it? Where's it coming from?
So we have a low, quite a slow-moving low sitting off just southeast of Banks Peninsula, and what that's doing is bringing quite an easterly flow right into Dunedin, so it's pushing really moist air off the ocean into over the land into that Dunedin and Otago area. And that combined with the air aloft, if you want to think of it, or in the upper atmosphere, is really cold. This makes a really unstable environment. Warm air at the bottom, cold air at the top. And so we get a lot of sort of decent heavy falls. We're seeing convection right around the country in different parts due to this cold pool of air above us.
Yeah, I don't want to be in Auckland winter, Lisa, but it's not particularly warm up here.
No, only about 14 degrees in Auckland, and although people down in Dunedin are well used to 14 degrees, that's not usual for November. Now, we've had a particularly cold outblast thanks to this low dragging up this really cold air and pushing it right up the country. So down to about 10 degrees overnight tonight in Auckland, and another, cooler day tomorrow, maximum temperature maybe 16 degrees, and again, an overnight minimum of about 11. So quite, not just for Auckland though, but right across the country, some cooler temperatures around, certainly in Wellington, feeling that southerly. And although the forecast temperature is one thing, that feels like temperature, when you get the wind chill added to it, is even colder.
You've caused my jaw to drop open. 10 degrees in Auckland overnight. Could you whip up a bit of sunshine for us, please? Please?
I wish I could, order it, but it's not quite that easy. There is plenty of low convective showers around that Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Bay of Plenty region at the moment, even central North Island. And if you do get caught under one of these showers, they can be quite heavy. You could get some surface flooding, poor visibility when driving. So it's just, as a precaution, take care out there. You can track them on the Met Service radar if you're that way inclined and are interested in the heavier showers. But there are quite a few showers around that region. In fact, right around the country, we have quite a bit going on. Christchurch is also having a very grey and wet day.
And that was Lisa Murray from the Met Service. As she said, if you want to keep a close eye on it, you can watch on the Met Service radar online. A Hutt City councillor is incensed at a $150 fine given to his wife for driving without a seatbelt in a council-owned car park. The police won't say if they're targeting drivers in car parks, but Councillor Chris Pine says they clearly are, and surely they have more important things to be doing. Reporter Alex Ashton spoke to Mr Pine at Lower Hutt's Riverbank car park.
We're in the Riverbank car park at Hutt City, beside the Hutt River, between the river and the stop bank.
Every day, hundreds of commuters park their cars here before getting a train into Wellington. On Friday, Mr Pine's wife was one such commuter. As she left the car park that evening, she spotted a police officer, buckled up and drove on.
She drove a short distance and another police officer came out of his car, flagged her down and said to her, "You're not wearing your seatbelt." And she was. So she said, "Look, I am." And he said, "Are you saying my colleague is a liar?"
Chris Pine says the police were clearly targeting people in the car park. 7 others were caught at the same place that night, but it's unclear if they were spotted in the park or on the road. The police won't confirm if they were running an operation to catch people out as they hopped in their cars, but Mr Pine says they clearly were.
They had somebody here spotting people driving with no seatbelts in the car park, and then the person was radioing ahead, so they can call it what they like. I call it an operation.
In a statement, the police's Wellington District Road Policing Manager, Derek Orchard, says seatbelts save lives, plain and simple. He says fining people in places like car parks helps make wearing seatbelts a habit. Last year, over 40,000 fines were handed out for seatbelt offences, bringing in nearly $6 million. It's unclear how many of those fines were in car parks specifically. So, what do drivers think? I asked people getting into their cars if they always buckled up.
Especially when you have other drivers coming in and, kids in the car and that kind of stuff, so it's always good to buckle up.
The road rules apply everywhere, so why shouldn't it be in a car park?
As soon as I get in the car and just put it on automatically.
Well, it's law, isn't it? Once you start your vehicle up, you've got to use your seatbelt.
Do you think other people do?
I can't answer that one. Most people do, though. Most, you see.
I decided to find out in a quick, unscientific survey, checking drivers as they leave the Riverbank car park.
They are wearing a seatbelt, so we've got 1 yes. We have another seatbelt there. There's 2, 3.
Indeed, all the drivers I spoke to and all those I saw were following the rules. But the Automobile Association says that's not always the case. A spokesperson, Dylan Thompson, says 1 in 4 people killed on our roads isn't wearing a seatbelt. He says any extra enforcement is a good thing.
Unfortunately, in recent years, we've seen more and more people dying who aren't buckled up. So we're right behind the police, actually getting out there and doing more to remind people that when you're in the car every time, you need to be buckling up.
The law is clear that anyone driving on a road must wear a seatbelt. But the issue at hand raises the question, what exactly is a road? Basically, it's very broad. Beaches, ferries and vehicle weighing stations all count, so drivers must be buckled up when driving on them. Chris Pine acknowledges the law is the law and his wife has paid the fine, but he says car parks are the wrong place for the police to prioritise.
Well, technically that's correct. It is a road, legally. People should be wearing their seatbelts. I'm not sure that it's achieved an awful lot for the community or for road safety, though.
Chris Pine says this would have been a prime case for some police discretion. Mō te ōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Alex Ashton aho.
Coming up, $450,000 for a Kiwi-built home in the neglected New Plymouth neighbourhood. Marfell residents tell the minister the homes are unaffordable and a rip-off. The Tauranga City Council narrowly passes a controversial bylaw banning begging and rough sleeping near retail and hospitality premises. And 6 people, this gives me the heebies, in a lift plunge 80 stories down a Chicago skyscraper and live to tell the story. We'd love your feedback on seatbelts in particular. It's caused a huge debate here. Car park, should you have to buckle up there? I mean, how many fatal accidents are happening in car parks? Also on Pike River and what the weather's like at your place. You can text us on 2108, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, or you can email at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Paul Brennan with the headlines.
Thank you, Lisa. The Dunedin City Council is calling for volunteers to fill sandbags in South Dunedin as widespread rain causes flooding across the region. Dozens of people have been told to leave their homes and the council has activated its emergency operations centre. It's asking people to stay off the roads to prevent floodwaters washing into properties. And the Otago Regional Council is preparing to open a spillway on the Pike River to protect the small town of Henley from flooding. The police in Melbourne say they have prevented significant loss of life, human life, with the arrests of 3 men prepared to carry out an Islamic State-styled attack. The men, aged 21 to 30, were arrested today in counter-terrorism raids in the city's north. The National Manager of Counterterrorism says they've been watching the trio for the last 9 months, but recently stepped up their plans. Some trainee doctors are cheating in their exams. The Otago University's acting dean, Barry Taylor, says some students have told others who are yet to sit their exams of some of the content. He says students are forbidden to talk to others about exams, but the nature of exams means students can't quickly learn the content required to pass. The government is putting another nearly $14 million into efforts to beat the spread of kauri dieback and myrtle rust. The Research, Science and Innovation Minister, Megan Wood, says it's important work gets underway as soon as possible to protect native trees. She says the new money is on top of $15 million that's already been committed. And the Tauranga City Councillor, who proposed a ban on begging near businesses, says he'll resign if it doesn't make the city safer. Councillors have narrowly passed the ban, which takes effect in next April. Terry Malloy says he's worried about the effect of begging on the wider community, but he also feels for those who are less fortunate. That's the news.
And let's turn to business now with Nona Pelsier. 2 of the country's biggest listed companies have had their annual meetings today, but have we got 2 different stories here, have we, Nona?
Yeah, we kind of do, yes. There's one of them is A2 Milk, so that's our biggest company. They sell specialty milk products with the A2 A2 Milk is what it is. Very clever branding, by the way. And they've made their money on infant formula sales to China. And they are still doing really well. They've expanded into the North American market, and that's been reflected in their first trading update for the first 4 months of the year. So they say that their net profit is up 64.5% to $86 million for that period, which is, extraordinary.
A lot of zeros.
Yeah. And revenue up 40.5% to $368.4 million. So that was the positive. And then there was the other story.
You had a contrast. What was it today?
It's Fletcher Building. Yes, they put an update up as well ahead of their annual meeting. Now, they've got a refreshed board and a new chief executive who've met the shareholders for the first time since they got into trouble with their construction division. Their building and interiors division lost about $1 billion over the last 2 years. They gave a trading update, which was it was a much different story. They say that their net profit, that's their their underlying profit, excluding these losses from the construction division and other extraordinary items, was going to be down 10%. That's in the first half. And then they said in the full year, their underlying profit, again, excluding these items, was going to be in the middle of their range, not at the top end. That sent their share price well down. They lost 11% of the value today. And they closed down 62 cents to a new low of $4.93 for the year. Now, look, 2 years ago, before these troubles bubbled up, that company's share price was trading at $10.70 a share. So that gives you some idea of how far down they've gone. So yeah, Ross Taylor's got a long way to go, but I had a chat with him just after the meeting, and this is what he had to say.
The reason you characterise me as gung-ho, you've got to be pragmatic and optimistic and realistic. And if I look at it, the New Zealand businesses are performing well. Yes, we had an incident up in Golden Bay Cement, but that was really it. We're a little bit behind on housing, but that's not because of the market. Our residential development business is performing. It was just what stock we had available. So if you look at New Zealand, it's going well. We remain within our construction provisions, tick. And then I go across to Australia, and the market's a bit softer there, and we've actually called that out as we've talked to guidance. So we've defined what we think that softness looks like. So nothing in all that says, you know, it might be a bit softer, but we're well on the path to doing what we said we would in FY19.
And so that is Ross Taylor, the chief executive of Fletcher Building. Yeah, so his share price didn't look so good. A2 Milks also fell at the end of the day, and that's because Asian markets generally are worried about trade, and A2 Milk has got a lot of exposure there. So overall, the NZX Top 50 Index, it ended down 0.8%. That's a drop of 73 points, and that was to 8,720. Now, the ASX is also down, and it's red everywhere, so that you expect that. On the other hand, the dollar is trading very well, and that's because there's nervousness over global economic growth, which will affect the US dollar, which was down quite a bit, and that has left our dollar at 68.5 US cents, which is fairly strong. 94 cents Australian, again, quite strong. 53.3 pence, and yeah, that's where we left the markets today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nona. Let's go now to these Kiwi-built homes that are being built in New Plymouth. 68 new Kiwi-built homes to be built there in a neglected neighbourhood in New Plymouth, more than a decade after a new housing project was first promised. In 2008, 28 Housing New Zealand properties were demolished in Marfell, and in 2012, 20 families were forced to move out. That was so they could make way for a development that never materialised. And some locals remain sceptical about the Kiwi-build initiative. Our Taranaki Wanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
Several more Housing New Zealand properties were demolished in Marfell last year after being ransacked by mobs who stripped them of anything of value. The remaining battle-scarred duplexes that pockmark the vast empty expanse of Bank Street and Discovery Place are mostly private rentals. The Minister for Housing and Urban Development, Phil Twyford, who made the announcement today, says Marfell had become a symbol of inaction. He says the $23 million Kiwi-build project will revive the whole neighbourhood.
For young families, first home buyers who will get their start in life in this community, an investment that we believe will revitalise and rejuvenate this community. It'll bring people right back into the heart of this neighbourhood and provide a lifetime of opportunities for young families right here.
Mr Twyford says the 3- and 4-bedroom homes will be warm and dry and built using the latest technology. But he acknowledges that with a maximum price tag of $450,000, the homes will be out of the reach of many Marfell residents. Mr Twyford says Kiwi-build homes are targeted at people who can service a mortgage.
There will be some people whose incomes are too low to be able to do that. So I would expect that people who have a household income of, let's say, 70,000, 70, 80, 90,000 would be able to take on the kind of mortgage that we're talking about for these homes here. But I know there are lots of people who earn less than that.
Mr Twyford says an influx of middle-income families will add a new dimension to an already vibrant community. But not everyone shared his vision. Tino Rangatiratanga flag draped over his shoulders and a baby in his arms, Ngāwika Preston approached the New Plymouth Mayor Neil Holdham about the gathering.
I didn't see any local representation, so I come over and Uncle Neil was like, "Hey bro, who are you?" And I was like, "Ngāwiki, who are you?" Neil. "Oh, Mr. Holdham, check. Have you been up here, sir?" He's like, yeah, I used to grow up down the BMX track. It's like, nah, here, where you're standing. It's like, nah, it's the first time I've been here. It's like, wow, I see no local representation here. Just a whole lot of black suits thinking they have authoritative power over Papatuanuku.
Mr Preston says the Kiwi-built homes would price locals out of their own neighbourhood.
As a construction contractor myself, that's ridiculous. Even the common 40-hour-a-week man on minimum wage could not afford that.
Do you think people from the Marfell
will not be able to afford those in their wildest dreams?
The 37-year-old says the going rate for a home in Marfell is in the mid-$200,000 mark.
Hello. Hi. How you doing? Good.
Minister Twyford spoke to labourer Luke Akoi, who was taking baby Taylor Joe for a walk with his partner Crete. He too thought the homes were pricey.
For a low decile area, I think that's pretty steep, you know, for the people that will be living here. That's pretty steep, but, you know, I suppose they're doing something, I guess, yeah. Yeah.
Mr Akoi, who paid $270 a week for his rundown rental, was interested in a rent-to-buy option floated by Mr Twyford.
What he was saying, you know, they'll own part of it until you pay off so much and then you buy it off them. I think, you know, it depends, you know, if it's $300 a week for, you know, I think that's affordable.
He wasn't worried about an influx of newcomers changing the vibe of the neighbourhood.
It's going to be quite a change here, you reckon?
Oh, it depends on the people that these houses bring in. You know, it's always, a community is always about the people. When people look from the outside and think, oh, you know, but you come and live here and, you know, the people are awesome here.
One big family,
this
community.
Yeah, you know, your kids can walk down the street and you know they're safe because everybody's looking out for your kids.
New Plymouth Mayor Neil Holdham could only see an upside.
Look at the surroundings here. I mean, it's stunning. I mean, we can see, you know, we've got Paritutu over there, we've got the Maunga up there. I mean, I think for a young family looking to get into a home that they can afford, it will change the nature of this community. So I think it's really positive, and I'm sure there'll be many people looking to invest in this because it's an amazing opportunity.
The diggers are set to roll into Marfell in the coming weeks, and the first home buyers should be in their properties next year. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te Ahipone, ko Robin Martin aho.
And we'll be interested to know what you think of that story. $450,000 for a Kiwi-built home in the New Plymouth neighbourhood of Marfell. A number of residents there say it's just way out of their reach. 2101 on the text. We'll be interested in your feedback. The Tauranga City Council has narrowly passed a controversial bylaw banning begging and rough sleeping near retail and hospitality premises. Councillors voted 6-5 in favour of the ban. From April next year, beggars and rough sleepers will be banned from areas within 5 metres of shops in the central business districts of Tauranga, Mount Maunganui and Greerton. At today's meeting, Councillor John Robson, who voted against the bylaw, described it as an embarrassment and said that the $215,000 earmarked to enforce it every year would be better spent elsewhere.
This type of gesture politics is an embarrassment. That's probably why we have the media here. We shouldn't be in this place. What we should be doing is providing $215,000 or more to provide facilities for the victims of central government policy and providing for them and giving them somewhere to go.
Then the problem will go.
Insisting that we clear the streets when those people have nothing to go is treating those people like waste. And I find it appalling that we're in this situation in this council in 2018. There's no good reason for this, and even the proponents of the motion accept that it won't solve anything.
Councillor Terry Malloy, who proposed the ban, says beggars and rough sleepers are driving people out of business. He told our reporter Katie Scotcher the bylaw was a win for the wider community.
Everybody knows that on the 1st of April we'll have this bylaw in place, so we can start working now to work with the various groups, those that are helping the beggars and the rough sleepers, and those that want to move them on. So we've got a 4-month opportunity to get started, and I'm hoping by the time the 1st of April comes that there'll be very little of a problem left.
How much money is the council going to put into this, or is that yet to be decided?
We already have our enforcement officers, and they will basically be the ones that will be doing. I don't believe there'll be any extra funds required. We also have the police. If there's an issue, which I'm not expecting one, that they will have to step in. So those are costs that we don't meet.
And a few of the rough sleepers, just spoke to a few of them that were in the meeting, were saying that this is, helping the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. What do you have to say to that?
Inequality in this country is in a bad state. But that's not something we in council can do anything about. All we can do is support those who are in a difficult position. And I believe if you read between the lines, this will actually help support them.
The ban has faced strong criticism from community groups, with some saying it'll push the vulnerable out of sight rather than supporting them. Tauranga woman Sasha Williams used to sleep rough in the city. She told Katie Scotcher the ban was superficial, as council enforcement officers aren't able to physically remove people without a court order.
It doesn't make much sense. It just feels like it's been for a waste, really.
Mm-hmm. And a few of the councillors were saying they were introducing it because there's been violence. Have you ever seen anything like that? Are you aware of?
I personally haven't, no.
So why do you think?
I don't know what they're talking about, to be honest, because I spend a lot of time in Greaton. I've seen the odd spaz out, but no. I don't know what they're talking about personally.
So why do you think they've introduced this bylaw then? What do you think they're trying to do?
Another rich get richer, poor get poorer scenario. Yeah.
Can you explain why you think that?
Well, what's the point? How are they going to police it? It's not a police issue unless the druggie's being interrogated.
Councillor Terry Malloy says he'll resign if the bylaw doesn't work. Heading to Australia now, the police in Melbourne say they've uncovered another terror plot in the city aimed at causing mass casualties. 3 men aged 21 and 30 were arrested this morning in counter-terrorism raids in the city's northern suburbs. The police say they are Australian nationals of Turkish background and were planning an Islamic State-style attack. They'd been under surveillance since March. The ABC's Thomas Oriti has the details.
Police say they had to act fast. In the early hours of this morning, more than 200 officers raided homes in Melbourne. 3 men are now in custody. And while the investigation is far from over, Victoria's Premier, Daniel Andrews, has been clear about the threat.
The seriousness of this potential incident should not be underestimated.
Some of the crucial details about this alleged potential incident aren't clear. But according to the Australian Federal Police, it involved a crowded place with a semi-automatic rifle. Assistant Commissioner Ian McCartney is the AFP's National Manager of Counterterrorism.
If we had not acted early in preventing this attack, we'll allege the consequences would have been chilling, with a potential significant loss of human life.
Here's what we know so far. The men are aged 21, 26 and 30. 2 of them are brothers. They've been of interest to authorities since early last year. All 3 are Australian nationals of Turkish origin, and they had Australian passports until all 3 were cancelled, one as recently as last month. The AFP says it took that action due to concerns the men were planning to travel overseas to engage in terrorist activity. Ross Gunther is in charge of counter-terrorism for Victoria Police.
Unfortunately, the ISIS propaganda machine and that of Al-Qaeda promotes this activity. So when people are prevented from travelling or it's difficult to get to the conflict zone, then often the view will be, well, I'll change tack and commit an act in the country in which I live. And we've seen that all over the world.
In this case, police say they don't know when the men allegedly planned to carry out the attack, not to mention where. They've only described it as a place of mass gathering. And the men didn't have the rifle. Police say they were trying to get it. But Chief Commissioner Graham Ashton says in the wake of recent events, they were forced to act.
Recently, over about the last week, they've become much more energised, so there's certainly been a lot of publicity and, talk about terrorism and certainly public place activity. We had the Burke Street trial on as well, so there was certainly a lot of public awareness around mass casualties, terrorism over recent times. So I don't know whether that's played a role or not, but certainly over the last week they've become much more energised about doing something more quickly.
And it's not just the speed of this investigation that's created a challenge for authorities. 2 of the men involved have no criminal background at all. One of them was fined more than a decade ago for failing to show the learner's plates on his car. And while there are still questions to answer, police say there's no longer a threat to the community.
Thomas Areti with that report. And just a few weeks ago, 3 men were found guilty of plotting to carry out a terror attack in Melbourne's CBD during the 2016 Christmas period. It is the stuff of nightmares. 6 people in a lift had a terrifying 80-storey plunge down a Chicago skyscraper and lived to tell the tale. The incident happened at the John Hancock Centre, which is Chicago's 4th tallest building. Elizabeth Brown reports.
Mexican tourist Jaime Montemayor was with his wife and 4 others when he got into the express lift after having a drink and soaking up the view from the signature room on the 95th floor. He told CBS immediately something went wrong.
We were going down, and then I felt that we were falling down, and then we listened a loud noise, clack, 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 clack. At the beginning, I believed that we were going to die.
Jaime's wife, Mana Castillo, says it was terrifying.
We were going fast. Some like, little rocks came into the elevator, so something was very little, so like dust. It was a very long ride until we stopped.
But when the lift did stop, their ordeal was far from over. They were trapped deep inside the building and, to their surprise, had plunged all the way down to the 11th floor. They texted friends outside who called emergency services, which took a while to arrive on the scene.
He came to tell us that everything's going to be okay, the elevator is secure, please wait, we're trying to locate you, whatever.
But he told us, we are trying to find you. We don't know where you are. That's what I was like, oh my God.
Chicago Battalion Fire Chief Patrick Maloney says it wasn't a straightforward rescue, as crews had to hammer out a concrete wall in the garage area of the 11th floor.
We had the cables that were broke were on top of the elevator. We couldn't do a elevator-to-elevator rescue. We had to breach a wall.
After a long 3 hours, the 6 passengers were finally able to crawl up a ladder and through a wall to freedom. Miraculously, none were injured. There were reports that 2 of those involved were New Zealanders, but that hasn't been confirmed. However, a day later, New Zealand tourists Rob Lilly and Andrew Winter were on top of the building admiring the view. They said they had no idea of the drama which had unfolded.
Probably wouldn't have come up. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's a bit scary thinking about that.
A broken hoist rope is being blamed for the elevator malfunction. The lift and 2 others in the building have been closed to the public while repairs are made and investigators try and establish exactly what happened. For Checkpoint, call Elizabeth Brown. Aho.
Angry church leaders have confronted Auckland councillors about a change that meant some were suddenly charged tens of thousands of dollars in rates. 5 leaders have addressed a council meeting about the changes, which the council says were made to more accurately reflect how church property was being used, as well as its increased value. And their words worked. After 4 hours, the churches received apologies, and the council has decided to put off any rates rises until next year while it reviews the policy. Rowan Quinn was there.
The council chamber briefly became a pulpit as church leaders preached to councillors about the errors of their ways. Reverend Pauline Stewart from St Heliers Presbyterian Church says they were shocked to receive a letter about their rates rise, which came with no warning.
We are voters, and as individuals we pay rates. We deserve better, and you are capable of doing better than that.
Under law, places of worship are supposed to be exempt from rates, but the council decided to break down what was on church properties and rate them specifically for what they were used for. That meant while churches were still rates-free, in many cases offices, parish residences and halls became rateable. Reverend Stewart says she was shocked because the churches did so much for people in the community, no matter what their faith.
Now that comes from the engine that drives these places, and that is worship. And if you start trying to separate that and call it little names and say that office can't be used because that's not worship, you are dividing what is a very basic tenet of community life.
Elim Church elder John Roberts told the councillors their buildings were used 100% for worship, so he was shocked when he received the new bill.
A few months ago we received our annual rates assessment, which had increased from the $400 rubbish collection charge to $21,000. That caused a bit of a shock. No explanation, no valuer had been to visit, no consultation, just a new policy and a massive bill.
The treasurer of Orake Baptist Church, Diane Robinson, says she filled in a survey about their buildings for the council's rate review, but wondered when she got her letter whether they'd thrown it in the bin. She says she didn't know how to pay for the new bill of nearly $6,000 a year.
Shall I shut down our free after-school drop-in for the local kids from the marae? Shall I cancel our free English as a second language classes? Where do I find this money from? You haven't given us warning.
In debating the issue, some councillors said if the churches don't pay their rates fairly, then other ratepayers will effectively have to pick up extra, and that's not fair. And Councillor Ross Clow said the rates review had revealed at least one serious breach.
In this exercise, we actually flushed out one entity that should have been paying $200,000 worth rates for car parks for 8 years. I'm just pointing out that's a lot of money. So we're flushing various things out that have come out that we didn't know about.
Councillor Kathy Casey said the rate changes had the potential to seriously damage the council's reputation. I Tamaki Makoto mo Checkpoint, ko Rowan Quinn DNA.
If it weren't for a mid-match epiphany 9 years ago, Azaz Patel might never have climbed to the pinnacle of cricket. In his debut test match in Abu Dhabi yesterday, the left-arm spinner led New Zealand to an improbable test victory as he ripped through the Pakistani batting lineup. But just 9 years earlier, Patel was battling away in Auckland club cricket with no clue he'd one day be a test hero. Ben Strang reports.
Big appeal. He's given it. What a win. What a win. What a delivery. Spun sharply. And what a victory for the New Zealanders. Wow.
That's Pakistani legend Waqar Younis describing the moment the rookie test spinner secured New Zealand a sensational 4-run victory over Pakistan. Azaz Patel is the new kid on the block in test cricket and didn't take long to announce himself. He snared 5 wickets for 59 runs in the second innings, the chief destroyer in the 5th tightest test victory of all time. For Patel, it completes a remarkable rise from a decent seam bowler in Auckland club cricket to match-winning off-spinner on the sport's greatest stage.
It sort of dawned on him that, look, you know, I'm not very tall, I don't get a lot of bounce, and I do have pace. But we discussed it, he was very keen on converting to spin, and over a number of years we worked together, and yeah, he's made himself into, well, as it speaks now, an international spin bowler.
That was another New Zealand spin bowling hero, Deepak Patel, who's been Azaz Patel's mentor since his spin bowling switch. Deepak Patel has only praise for his protégé.
From the very first moment I saw him bowl spin, you could always tell he was a natural, and the great thing about it is he's got the ability to spin the ball, and yeah, from there on, it's an art, and you've got to learn, and it takes a long time, and I think he's reaping the rewards from that.
Pakistan had started the day in commanding position, 37 without loss, needing a further 139 runs for victory. While Azaz Patel and Ish Sodhi were able to take 3 wickets in the space of 7 balls early on, Pakistan ploughed ahead and were 130 for 4 at lunch, eyeing a 1-0 lead in the 3-match series. But what followed was Pakistan's 3rd worst collapse when chasing a victory, as they crumbled under the thorough examination from Patel. Their final 6 wickets fell for just 24 runs, sparking joyous celebrations from captain Kane Williamson and the team.
You know, some of the characteristics that we hold pretty dear is that scrapping attitude, and we're able to get back into the game with so many different contributions, whether that was with the bat in the field, with the ball throughout these 4 days.
It was the spin bowling duo of Patel and Sodhi who started the rot, combining for the run out of danger man Babar Azam. Then the wickets tumbled, as Patel claimed 4 of the final 5 to finish with the second best figures for a Kiwi spinner on debut. When his final ball drifted in, spun viciously past the edge of Azhar Ali's bat and clattered into his pads, the appeal filled the dense Abu Dhabi air.
It's still quite surreal at the moment. It's quite hard to kind of soak it in, but I'm sure it'll sink in the next couple of hours or next couple of days. But yeah, definitely wouldn't have dreamt it to start any better. Be in a position to win your country a game of Test cricket and to do it in that fashion, it was quite special.
Azaz Patel ended with 7 wickets in the match. The Black Caps now head north to Dubai for the second test of the 3-match series, starting on Saturday. For Checkpoint, Ben Strang.
And time for your feedback. Before we get to that, though, apologies to the Hutt City Councillor Chris Milne. We misnamed him in an earlier item. So Chris Milne was the councillor whose wife got pinged $150 because she wasn't wearing her seatbelt in a car park. It was a council-owned car park, a shopping car park, basically. And we're getting a lot of feedback on that. This from Ariel. A young friend undid her seatbelt at the top of their long driveway when her partner braked hard to miss the cat, she says. She broke her nose and lost 3 front teeth. I will never ever drive off unless everyone, including me, is strapped in. The damage can happen anytime when the vehicle is moving. Another person says, my friend always undoes her seatbelt before I finish parking. If she'd been with me the shocking day I hit the accelerator hard instead of the brake, I probably would have killed her. So there you have it.
Radio New Zealand News at 6. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The police have been door knocking in Otago telling residents to evacuate because of flooding. But people in the small rural settlement of Henley near Dunedin have decided to stay put. Access to the area is limited because a road is shut because of a slip and another road could close if water levels rise. Motorists in Otago are being told to avoid non-urgent travel for the rest of the day because of flooded highways. The Transport Agency also says strong winds are bringing down tree branches, making driving dangerous. The Dunedin City Council says heavy rain has caused problems throughout the city's catchment. Fire and emergency has also been busy.
We've had 14 call-outs in the last 2 to 3 hours, and mainly just individual flooding events in the Dunedin Losgill area. There has been one house where the ceiling collapsed because of water coming through the roof, but the others have just been water coming into the lower levels of the structure.
Residents are being told to treat all floodwaters as contaminated, and Dunedin people are still being asked to cut back on showers and use of washing machines to ease pressure on wastewater systems. Rain has now eased, though almost 50 millimetres fell in the city today and 70 millimetres fell in the days leading up to the downpour. Meteorologist Lisa Murray says it's because of a slow-moving low.
That combined with the air aloft, if you want to think of it, or in the upper atmosphere is really cold. This makes a really unstable environment. Warm air at the bottom, cold air at the top, and so we get a lot of sort of decent heavy falls.
Lisa Murray from Met Service there. River levels remain high across Otago. There's also a snow and ice warning on the Lindis Pass and State Highway 85. The government is making plans to ban smoking in cars carrying children under 18. Pressure has been mounting for action. Both the Children's Commissioner and Plunkett say it's a major risk to children's health. The Associate Health Minister, Jenny Salesa, says she has been working behind the scenes with the Health Ministry on a ban.
We are at a stage now where I am now consulting with my colleagues. The draft cabinet paper is what I'm consulting on at the moment, and so we should have something to announce, hopefully, in the very near future on this issue.
Jenny Salesa says if approved by the Cabinet, legislation would be before the House early next year to put the ban in place. Police in Melbourne have arrested 3 men believed to have been plotting a terrorist act in the city. The men, who are aged between 21 and 30, are from the northern suburbs, and police have revealed few details of the so-called terror plot. The ABC's Phil Johnson reports.
Federal and Victorian police, along with ASIO and other agencies, raided 4 properties in Melbourne's north, where 3 men aged 21, 26 and 30 were arrested. It's alleged the men were attempting to source a semi-automatic rifle to strike at a non-specified target to inflict maximum damage in an ISIS-inspired attack. Authorities say the men are Australian of Turkish background and all had their passports cancelled this year. 2 of the men are brothers. Authorities say the men will face terrorism-related charges which carry a maximum term of life in prison. The men are expected to face court today.
Phil Johnson in Melbourne. The police say they're committed to building trust with the Pike River mine families. They met with them in Greymouth today to explain how they would collect forensic evidence and why they needed to do their own risk assessment before deciding if they would go into the mine. A family spokesperson, Bernie Monk, has talked about the mistrust between them and the police and called for a fresh group of officers with no prior involvement in the case to be brought on board. Assistant Commissioner Tusha Penny, who was at today's meeting, says this might not be possible.
There are new staff being brought in all the time. I myself have only been involved with Pike River for the last week. So what we can assure people is we will have the right police officers at the right level with the right experience.
Tusha Penny says a decision about whether police will enter the mine will be made as soon as possible. The University of Otago is trying to identify which third-year medical students cheated in an end-of-year exam. It says some students told others yet to take their exams some of the content. Dan Dalgetty reports.
The acting dean, Barry Taylor, says the university knows that cheating took place, but not who was involved. Students are forbidden from talking to others about exams as it gives an advantage. However, Professor Taylor says the nature of exams means students can't quickly learn the content required to pass. Students will be interviewed, and the medical school is still determining the consequences. It says it is a matter of honesty and professional behaviour that would not be expected from people training to be doctors. Called Dan Dalgetty, TNA.
It's 5 minutes past 6. On to sport, and a former mentor of New Zealand spinner Aziz Patel says his journey onto the international stage is one of perseverance. Patel was the star of the fourth day of the Black Caps' dramatic 4-run win over Pakistan in the first test in Abu Dhabi. The 30-year-old debutant took 5 for 59 to help New Zealand to their narrowest test win. Former Black Cap Deepak Patel helped a young Aziz make the switch from pace bowling and says to be able to perform as he did in his debut test is impressive.
He took the initiative to come and see me about converting to spin, and really, to be honest with you, from the very first moment I saw him bowl spin, you could always tell he was a natural. From there on, it's just about, it's an art, and you got to learn, and it takes a long time, and I think he's reaping the rewards from that.
Deepak Patel. The All Blacks hooker Dane Coles has laughed off suggestions he could be forced to play in the loose forwards or at lock this weekend as an undermanned team prepared to take on Italy in Rome. Coles should start the final test of the year with a bunch of rookies getting a run as well. However, with just 4 loose forwards available and 3 locks, any injuries could have the side scrambling. Coles isn't expecting to be jumping in the lineouts, but concedes coach Steve Hansen may have other ideas.
Now that you've said that, I don't know. Oh, wait, we've got a meeting this afternoon, so maybe the big fella might say something, but I'll have to maybe practice my jumping. It's probably, you might let the boys down a bit.
Dane Coles, that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Bollinger marks the 50th birthday of the Beatles going white. Part 2 of our window on the world of accidental scientific breakthroughs looks at the discovery of cosmic background radiation, the leftovers from the Big Bang. They just thought it was poor TV reception. And this week's After Dinner speaker, Lee Marama McLaughlin, talks about getting Māori prisoners back on the straight and narrow. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, from After the News at 7 on RNZ National.
Short forecast now from Med Service taking us through to midnight tomorrow, Wednesday. For Northland to Manawatu, that includes Coromandel Bay of plenty in the central high country. Showers, heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms clearing for a time tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine apart from a few showers in the afternoons and evenings. Possible thunderstorms inland. Horowhenua through to Wellington, also Waitatapa. A few showers, some heavy, possible hail and thunder, chiefly about the ranges in the afternoons and evenings. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and northern Westland. Fine spells, isolated showers, showers becoming scattered and heavier inland in the afternoons and evenings, possible thunderstorms and hail. For the rest of Westland and for Fiordland, occasional rain today, mainly fine tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, periods of rain, heavy falls, snow to about 600 metres today, rain easing in Canterbury tonight. Gale southeasterlies about the coast easing tonight, and at the Chathams, periods of rain clearing tomorrow morning. It's nearly 8 minutes past 6.
And you're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Civil Defence is urging Dunedin motorists to stay off the roads after torrential rain continues to drench the city, causing widespread flooding and slips. There's a heavy rain warning in place until at least 7 o'clock tonight, and residents being urged to conserve water to ease pressure on the wastewater system. The police have been door to door telling Otago residents to evacuate because of flooding, but people in the small rural settlement of Henley near Dunedin have decided to stay put. Our reporter Tim Brown is near Henley and joins us now. Tim, what's it like where you are?
It is very wet and very windy. We can see evidence of where the spillway is starting to fill up the floodplains near Henley and on the Taieri Plain. Water levels are rising quite rapidly. I'm looking at a road that accesses Henley right now, and it is flooding across the road, and that level is building all the time. The floodwaters are actually quite rapid at the moment.
So in terms of just water on the ground, what would you say? Is it up to your mid-shin, or what are we talking about here?
Well, looking at some of the plains that have already been flooded, there are power poles that are significantly covered. I would say they're a good 4 or 5 metres up at least. Depending on what route you take on the road, the car would probably be up to the windows. On other sides, it would be around the lower base of the tyres. It really does vary from plane to plane down here. What's
the situation with the residents who are deciding not to evacuate? Can you tell us more about that?
Well, Henley is an interesting little community in that it's built right on the bank of a river, and if that river overflows, it spills straight basically into their doorstep. But they've been here before. This is not a new situation, and they're holding tight in the hopes that this is nothing like the last floods, which did impact their houses.
And I understand residents are being urged to conserve water, which kind of seems, well, it feels kind of counterintuitive with so much rain coming down. What's the deal there?
Well, they want us to conserve water to take the strain off the wastewater and the stormwater systems, which obviously as the rain continues to fall and as the waters move from the rivers further back on the catchment, put it under pressure and are causing it to overflow in certain areas such as Middlemarch.
So sandbagging also, Civil Defence were calling for people to come with their shovels in essence. Where are they sandbagging?
The sandbags are available from Mosgiel, which is a small town just out of Dunedin, and in South Dunedin, where there have been flood issues in the past. It's really precautionary at the moment, but there will obviously be residents that are nervous seeing the floodwaters spill up their street and towards their houses.
And what can we expect for Dunedin over the next few hours?
Well, the rain has eased now, but it isn't gone altogether, and there is a fresh lot of rain due tomorrow, which will put more pressure on these rivers, which are already at flood or near flood.
Keep dry. That is Tim Brown. He's near Henley, which is a small rural settlement near Dunedin, and they've decided to stay put, a lot of the residents there, despite the police going door to door telling people to evacuate. And as we heard there from Tim, there's been sandbagging going on in Dunedin, and the water is pretty high where he is. Former Prime Minister Helen Clark says the South Pacific has become the meat in the sandwich of an economic Cold War. Her comments come after a fruitless APEC summit that ended without a joint statement and further highlighted US-China tensions. Ms Clark says she doesn't like seeing the Pacific become a plaything in the battle between great powers. She says trade wars and shouting help no one.
A lot of the commentary now is focusing on this being a forerunner of the G20 summit that's coming up very, very soon, and the same great powers will be playing on the stage there. But really none of this is productive. Trade wars are never productive. Upping the rhetoric's never productive. In the end, you have to get back to talking to sort out differences, and talking means engaging. It doesn't mean shouting.
Is this a Cold War?
Well, it's like an economic Cold War, but then where I feel for the South Pacific is it's become the meat and the sandwich of great power competition as well. And while in the past the complaint might have been about being a bit overlooked, there is a problem having too much attention too when very large checkbooks come out around the sub-region. So this is all rather concerning.
Yeah, well, so where does it leave New Zealand? We are friends, we have strong economic ties with China, a lot of firsts with China. The US is our very, very good friend. And here we are, and we've had the Trade Minister suggesting we can be a bridge between these two countries. What is our role in all of this?
Well, obviously the relationship with the US is a long-standing one, and notwithstanding that we could never conclude a bilateral free trade agreement with them, it's been a very, very good trade partner, good market for New Zealand. China, of course, in recent years has become a very, very strong market too. We need both of them, good relations with both, and it's best for the small countries like New Zealand where the great powers aren't fighting like this.
We have suffered as a result of, well, we're collateral damage in some sense. We've suffered as a result of the tariffs that have been put on by the US. And you've got Mike Pence saying potentially they could double those. They will keep going until China modifies their behaviour. What is the worst case scenario for New Zealand in this, do you think?
Well, as you say, we're collateral damage. We're not the target of this. But we just have to hang in and continue advocating for people playing by trade rules. The WTO ministerial round, of course, has been in terrible trouble, partly because of the same tensions we're now seeing played out in the East Asia Summit and in APEC. But for a small country like New Zealand, with no great weight to throw around, and only the strength of arguments and the strength to being a good partner and neighbour, we need great powers to return to civility, and we should be really positioning ourselves to be able to have good relations with both.
Does China have more influence in the Pacific now, though, than the US?
Well, the US was missing in action for a lot of years. Its eyes were averted elsewhere. In the early 2000s, it was very much focused on the Middle East arena. And then when President Obama did the pivot to Asia, that didn't necessarily have much of a focus on the South Pacific either. Meanwhile, China has got on with the Belt and Road proposal, which now covers infrastructure projects in about 70 countries. And of course, some of those include the Pacific, and they're big projects. I mean, the $4 billion of financing for Papua New Guinea's national road networks, money all around. So in a way, I think it's catch-up time also for Western powers, that you shouldn't overlook friends, because other friends will move in.
So should we be worried about China's influence in the Pacific?
Well, I personally don't like seeing the Pacific treated as some kind of plaything in a battle between great powers. I think that it's something perhaps the Pacific Island Forum countries as a group need to reflect on, to position as a group that sits rather evenly between the geopolitical great powers, because otherwise they're going to be collateral damage in these contests.
Do you think they are currently a plaything?
Well, I think they're the object now of increased attention by both sides. China from Belt and Road with a lot of infrastructure money, and of course, often with loans that may not have much prospect of being repaid. The Tongan Prime Minister spoke recently about his concern of not being able to service debt. We saw a port, as I recall, in Sri Lanka being, in effect, possessed by the Chinese financiers. We saw Prime Minister Mahathir of Malaysia back away from contracts with China that had been entered into by the previous government because of fears of not being able to service debt. So I think, Pacific needs to think very, very carefully about the liabilities it's taking on. On the other hand, the more traditional partners, US, New Zealand, Australia, European Union, and of course Japan, need to be thinking about the positive contributions they can make to the Pacific and dealing with the Pacific's real challenges, building its disaster resilience in the face of climate change is an overwhelming preoccupation for many of them.
Can New Zealand afford to just sit on the fence in this, in between the US and China? Can we maintain both relationships as they are and sit on the fence, or will that come back to bite us at some point?
We have to be able to maintain both relationships. On the values side, it is clear beyond doubt that New Zealand is a Western democracy. It has its own very credible version of the rule of law. People have a say. It also is true that with the US, which shares the same basic value system, we have a strong trade relationship. Now, the values system of China and the political system are very different. But on the other hand, it is a great power in our neighbourhood, and it's one that we have derived significant economic benefits from a trading relationship with. So we have to be able to walk and chew gum here.
If the heat's going to come out of this, it's going to require both of them to take a step back or one of them to take a step back. Is anyone going to blink? Is anyone going to do that?
Well, again, one of the strengths of an open society like the US is that there is debate and there is countervailing pressure. There's a lot of US economic interest in and investment in China. And, at some point, those voices are going, I think, become quite loud in the years of the US administration. They haven't yet, but at some point they will, because the US economy will start to be damaged by a trade war that keeps upping the stakes.
Helen Clark there, and this afternoon hundreds of PNG police have descended on Parliament in Port Moresby, demanding payments they say they are owed for providing security at the APEC summit. Footage shared by an MP shows smashed glass from windows and upturned security scanners in the building's foyer. Police were demanding to speak to the Prime Minister, Peter O'Neill, saying the government had the money to buy Maserati cars for VIPs, but not enough to pay them for their work. Smoking in cars carrying children could be a thing of the past, with the government hoping to put a ban in place next year. Pressure has been mounting on the government to take action on the issue, with both the Children's Commissioner and Plunkett saying it is a major health risk factor to children. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
In 2014, the Health Select Committee was presented with a 2,000-strong petition calling for a ban on smoking in cars with children under the age of 18. The petition received cross-party support from the committee, which was comprised of MPs from Labour, National, the Greens and New Zealand First. The Children's Commissioner, Andrew Beecroft, says progress has stalled since then and it's time to take action.
The children had a voice, and if they were asked and if they could vote, knowing what we do about the dangers of smoking, I bet I know what children would say. As Children's Commissioner, I'm saying it for them. Ban it, stop it and move on it.
The Associate Health Minister, Jenny Salisa, says action is being taken. She says she's been working behind the scenes with the Health Ministry on a ban.
We are at a stage now where I am now consulting with my colleagues. The draft cabinet paper is what I'm consulting on at the moment, and so we should have something to announce, hopefully, in the very near future on this issue.
Jenny Salisa says if approved by the Cabinet, legislation will be before the House early next year to put the ban in place. National's health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse says National's open to a ban, but it will depend exactly on what's proposed and whether it can be shown that it will be effective. And he says enforcement is also something to be considered.
It's one thing to say, let's legislate to ban something, but when it requires the diversion of, for example, potentially police resources into the management of that law, then I think it gets a bit difficult. I think most members of the public would rather that police were focusing on other aspects of crime.
Mr Woodhouse says the issue did arise when National was in power.
Well, the Smoke-Free 2025 recommendations included things like legislative responses. The previous government was quite clear that it wasn't certain that they would be effective and wanted to pursue other more effective strategies.
Michael Woodhouse says National will have to take a close look at whatever is proposed before it decides whether or not to back it. Atu I te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
The fight to stop Cody dieback and myrtle rust has been given a multi-million-dollar boost by the government. Today, the Minister of Research, Science and Innovation, Megan Woods, announced a new research fund of nearly $14 million to be spent over 3 years. Te Manukurahi reporter John Boynton was at the Auckland Botanic Gardens for the announcement.
There's still very little known about the two pathogens, Cody dieback and myrtle rust, which have had a devastating impact on New Zealand forest. The Waitakere Ranges is currently the worst hit by Cody dieback. A rāhui was put in place by the local iwi Te Kawero a Maki for the last year, and tracks closed in a bid to stop it spreading. Megan Wood says the funding is about finding a way to save our forest.
Both of these pathogens are endangering some of our most iconic and culturally significant trees. Trees that are critical to our biological heritage and to our cultural identity.
Myrtle rust will receive $5 million over 3 years, with research for Cody dieback receiving $8.75 million. This is on top of research funding of $4.7 million already allocated to Kodi Dieback this year. Ms Wood says the funding will speed up the development of ways to better manage the spread of the diseases.
Our best researchers will continue to work with their international colleagues, with Māori, with industry, with communities to develop new ways of reducing damage to vulnerable plants and landscapes and future-proof them against further damage.
Melanie Mark Shadbolt is the Māori Director of the National Science Challenge, which will lead the research project.
We're probably quite a wee way away from understanding how to actually kill it, but we can look for alternatives to stopping the spread, so we can look for tools that might minimise spread.
And she says more needs to be learnt from the rāhui currently in place in the Waitakere Ranges.
I personally think that our wider community see rāhui as a Māori, hocus pocus kind of witchcrafty type thing that's of no benefit, no use, and our communities just don't understand that it is effectively another environmental management tool that Māori have used for, decades and centuries.
Forest and Birds Central North Island Regional Manager Dr Rebecca Sterneman says she's relieved the government is finally hearing the voice of conservationists.
Conservation is being prioritised, and it's not just primary industries which is receiving the funding for research against invasive species.
Dr Sterneman believes the funding needs to look into how the disease is threatening other trees.
And this will give an opportunity for that research to occur and to get an idea of where in the country the disease is and which areas we can protect and cordon off to stop the disease spreading.
The funding will be contracted through the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton a home.
A proposed new home for Western Springs Speedway in South Auckland has been slammed as a white elephant. Costs for the proposal, which would transform Collindale Park in Manukau into the country's top speedway destination, have ballooned to $30 million in recent months. The Auckland Council heard public submissions on the controversial idea this afternoon, and the debate is still raging. Our reporter Annika Smith filed this report.
The proposal to shift the speedway 25 kilometres south was met with fierce resistance this afternoon as members of the public stepped up to the microphone. Among them was Gary Roberts, who worked as a speedway promoter for nearly 20 years. He says the pricey proposal left him speechless.
For the life of me, I cannot see how a new stadium in South Auckland could be a financial success to the council or foreseeable promoters and competitors. As for ratepayers subsidising a new venue, this leaves me speechless. If that's the best we can do with ratepayers' money, I think we all need to take a very hard look at ourselves.
He says the proposed venture will spell disaster for Speedway New Zealand.
After 90 years of Speedway at Western Springs, and for our sport not to operate at this magnificent venue would be the biggest setback in the history of Speedway in New Zealand.
Council departments have flagged their support for the proposal that would build on an earlier investment in Collindale Park, but it won't be cheap. The project needs an allocated $10 million of council money, plus a further unbudgeted $20 million for the track and facilities such as toilets and contestant pits. But Wendy's restaurant boss and Speedway stakeholder Danny Lendich says Collindale Park is simply too isolated to be a successful Speedway destination.
Any business that requires people, you don't go to a place where there's no people. I know with our Wendy's hamburger chain, we have properties around New Zealand. We won't build there because the Democrats doesn't allow us to do it.
He backed Mr Roberts' submission that ratepayers' money would be better spent elsewhere.
I'm a kidney transplant patient. I spend a lot of time in the Auckland hospital. The Auckland City Council will be better off to put some money into the hospital. You need to take a trip up there and have a look.
Mr Lendich says his family is one of the biggest ratepayers in Auckland, and he directed a threat to Auckland Mayor Phil Goff if he ignored his objections.
I said to Phil, if you don't support us and stay at Western Springs... What? Phil's here. I know he's here. That's why I'm telling him, reminding him. If you don't support us at Western Springs, you won't be the mayor.
Whether the Speedway's future actually bears on Mr Goff's job prospects remains to be seen. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Annika Smith aho.
And to some of your feedback now, earlier in the show, we were talking about 68 Kiwi-build homes that are going to be built in New Plymouth in the neglected neighbourhood of Marfell. $450,000 they are, and some of the locals in that piece expressed concerns that they were a little bit pricey. Your feedback here, John says, Marfell, that's a joke. I grew up there. They'll need to give those houses away to get people to buy them. It's laughable. They'll be left empty. And this one, if Kiwi-build is really meant to help all of the struggling first home buyers, they should be leasehold only, with ratcheting down of income guidelines, options to buy the land after the house is paid off. Otherwise, it doesn't even touch those below the average income. I can't understand why the minister seems to be reluctant to try some more flexible options. The other story that we brought you this afternoon was about the tickets being handed out in council car parks. This was in Hutt City. It's a council-owned car park, but police are giving out tickets for people not wearing their seatbelts, $150 worth. And the general feedback seems to be buckle up, doesn't matter if it's a car park. Although this person says, interesting that the police treat car parks as roads when it suits them. When our car was hit and nearly written off in a car park by someone who bolted, the police told us car parks are not our responsibility, deal with the car park owners. And this one sums it up, really. Buckle up, do it before you move, they say. My pet peeve is people driving ridiculously slow in car parks while they fumble around with their seat belts. So there you have it. That's it for Checkpoint tonight. Catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The Transport Agency is urging against any non-essential travel in Otago and around Dunedin as flooding, snow and ice hit. Pressure has been mounting on the government for a ban on smoking in cars. The police in Melbourne arrest 3 men believed to have been plotting an Islamic State-style terrorist act in the city. The University of Otago is trying to identify trainee doctors who cheated in an end-of-year exam. And conservationists say funding to stop kauri dieback needs to look at other native species too. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather will be at 7.
RNZ National, with a fresh take on the day's news at 10 every weeknight with Karen Hay.
IPEN's halted its investigation into Alan Ray when he resigned his membership,
including the latest national and international news from the RNZ News team.
Officials from China and the US clashed over whether the statement should criticise